I would like to introduce you to this webinar recording that's uncovering and comparing several data governance maturity models. I would like to also preface that I have an online course available right now that is covering this topic in much more detail, while also covering more data governance maturity models than the ones you will see in this webinar. If you want to learn all there is to know about data governance maturity models in order to establish or improve your data governance program, I'll post a link to the online course in the description below. So without further ado, here's the webinar.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are. I'm very, very happy to be here with you virtually. I'm so sorry that I can't meet everybody in person and chat afterwards, but as Nicola said, we'll try and leave room for questions and answers at the end. And, regardless, please feel free to check out LightsOnData.com or subscribe to the YouTube channel or follow me on LinkedIn, and I promise you won't be disappointed. And definitely, if you're interested in the slides, just get in touch with me on LinkedIn, and I'll definitely be able to provide you a link, or maybe we can just probably post them online somewhere, and I'm sure we can make them available. All right, but now let's start to uncover the data governance maturity model by first looking at the basics of the concepts, and then we'll just go over a quick high-level overview over a handful of them, because unfortunately there's no universal standard for the data governance maturity model. We'll see what steps we need to take if we ever wanted to use one, and what pitfalls to avoid. And we will conclude with some lessons learned, some benefits and shortcomings. And as I mentioned again, we'll try and leave some room at the end there for questions and answers. All right, so now on to the basics. So what is a maturity model? It's really just a way for an organization to assess their improvement in a particular discipline. And in our case, that discipline is data governance. So in other words, we want to have a way to see where our data governance program was yesterday, where it is today, and to see if any improvements have been made. We also want to see where we want to get to tomorrow. How do we get there, right? And what steps we need to take. And this maturity model will give us that framework to be able to do that, to get those answers. So again, the basic idea behind it is that you have a number of levels, and as one increases in maturity levels, and you gradually adopt a new level or a new stage, the rewards that come with it tend to increase. So the overall value and impact and productivity, quality, and overall capabilities tend to increase, and at the same time, the risks and the waste tend to decrease. Now, there are quite a few characteristics that do come with each one of these maturity models. There are really a handful of them. The first one is that one of the, it does come with its own narrative. So each level comes with its own description, its own set of characteristics. So it's really telling you, well, you know what, if you are at level 2, your data governance program looks like this. It has these following options. It has these characteristics. And they're mostly qualitative, and they usually also describe a number of domains or subdomains. Now, each level also comes with a set of recommendations and risks and benefits that are either implicit or explicit. So they are stated out, or they can just be derived from the description. Now, the domains and subdomains that I just mentioned earlier, they can be broad, such as awareness, data stewardship, tools and technology, or it can be a bit more specific. For example, data governance authority or data dictionary adoption. It all depends based on the model that provides these domains and subdomains. Now again, each maturity model comes with a set of artifacts, most notably for an assessment tool, so for a way to be able to see what level you are at. Again, it comes with that narrative, that description of each level and each of the subdomains and domains. And of course, also a scoreboard to be able to track your own progression. Lastly, we will also see that they are similar in concept, but different at the same time. Now, it all really started with the CMM, the Capability Maturity Model, which is an assessment model developed by the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University in late 80s, early 90s for the US Department of Defense. And it was done in order to ascertain the process maturity levels in software development. And in other words, the US Department of Defense need to find a way to evaluate their software contractors. So they had some existing software contractors, some potential ones, and they wanted to see, well, if they were going to select contractor A versus B, what would be those pros and cons and the benefits that they can expect from each one, right? So they were developing this model here. Now, I think it's to be aware of the CMM because a lot of maturity models in general use this as inspiration, and because of it, you'll find quite a few similarities out there because of it. Now, the model describes 5 levels of best engineering and management practices, and while it was first applied to software development, the CMM has been developed for a range of other fields, including data governance maturity models, right? And that's what we want to cover today. And there are quite a few out there. Quite a few. I've just really selected these 9 because they tend to be a bit more prevalent, though it's actually quite a mix. There are quite a few that are always in your face and some more, let's say, obscure ones. So we have things like the CMMI Data Maturity Management Model, the Enterprise Data Management Council, Gartner's Enterprise Information Management Maturity Model. They all end with maturity model, by the way, in the title. The IBM Data Governance Council Maturity Model, the Oracle Data Flux, Kalido, Stamford, and the Open Universiteit Netherlands Maturity Model. Now, there is quite a bit of a confusion into, I think, some of the namings and really what would each one of these mean. And the reality is that, for example, these 3 at the top, the CMMI, the Enterprise Data Management Council, the Gartners, they're actually not data governance maturity models per se. Okay, they're more data management maturity models, but they do have a data governance component. So if you were to take the data, the knowledge areas from DAMA as an example, right? We have these 11 knowledge areas. Data governance is one of them. Well, similarly, each one of these models, they have data governance as one of those main domains that they're tracking. So maybe that's where one of the confusion comes in. Not to make things more complicated, but then you have things like the data flux, data governance maturity model. That when you do read it, it really reads a lot more like data management maturity model with the data governance component. So that's not helpful that, it is called a data governance maturity model, but it's mostly data management with a data governance component. So clear as mud. All right. The idea here, though, is, you have all these options. And again, the 9 listed here are not just the only ones available. The first question is, how do I choose one, right? And again, when you have options, you want to start comparing them to see which one you should choose. And the question is, are they comparable? Quick answer is no. I mean, you can compare them, but they're not quite comparable, not one-to-one. And I'll briefly tell you why. Actually, I think Data Crossroads did this really nice comparative analysis last year on data management maturity models. So they do have some data governance maturity models trickled in there. So what I'm going to show you on this slide, it's part from their analysis and part from mine as well. We can see right off the bat, if we were to take even at these 9 data governance and data management maturity models, they even differ in the number of levels that they're tracking, and they're ranging from 4 to 6. The number of artifacts, even though it might be the same set, it differs, right? The way they're doing the assessment, it's different. The description of each one of these levels and domains is different. The recommendations and action items, they're all different, even though a lot of them are actually based on the CMM that we've briefly went over earlier. They do have a number of domains and subdomains, which you can't really compare one-to-one, and the range is widely different from 2 to 11 domains, or from 4 to 112 subdomains in some instances, which in a way is understandable because the provenance differs as well. A lot of them do come from software providers, consultant services, though some are developed by just industry organizations like the Enterprise Data Management Council or the CMMI, and some are just developed internally like Stamford's. And the other challenge, of course, is that they do come with cost attached. So it can be cost prohibitive to just purchase all of them and then compare them and see which one you want to choose. And the cost, ranges. Some are free, and I'll give you an example of a free one. But some can cost, a few $1,000s, if not more. So back to that question, right? Are all of these models compatible with each other? If I use one model and my peer uses another one, can we just compare our results and performances? And again, the short answer is that no, you can't really. Okay, so let's take a quick look into a couple of these models, and I'll use this following slide as a template. I'll just put in the middle there what makes this model unique. At the bottom, you'll see that main takeaway, and on the bottom left, you'll just see a link where you can find more information and a lot more detail that I can provide you today, just because we don't have that much time. I don't want to go into a lot of details with the CMMI, but I do want to mention that this is one of those examples that this is a data management maturity model, where it's tracking different data management areas, where it does have data governance as one of the components. So that's kind of the main difference. It does have data governance, but it's not its focus. On the other hand, though, if we were to take a look at IBM's, which is one of the earlier ones that was developed, it does have the 5 levels. And it was mostly modeled based on the CMM, though the names of the levels are not quite the same, similar but not quite the same. And the model helps assess and measure progress within each of the following 11 domains. Now, when you're reading the domains, though, you can see things like data quality management or data architecture, information security and privacy. And you must be thinking, well, George, I thought you said this is data governance, not data management, and those are data management areas there. What's going on? And the whole idea is, how IBM is thinking about it is saying, if you're reading from the top what the outcomes is, they're saying, you know what, we're implementing data governance because we want to get value out of our data, and at the same time, we want to make sure we're not going to get fined or go to jail on how we're using this data. And in order to be able to do that, we definitely need to have a good data governance structure in place. We need to have the policies and the stewardship, but we also require good data quality. We need that information lifecycle. We need information security, which in turn are supported by data architecture and having the proper classification, auditing, and so forth and so on. But when you're looking at each one of these, how they're being described for each level, it is really all from a data governance perspective. So it's kind of telling you, well, in order to have a good data quality management, these are the data governance key areas that you need to implement. And that's kind of one of the main takeaways too, that 11 separate domains are individually assessed. Then you basically just average out that score and see what level you're at from 1 to 5. But I think it's actually really good because you can start with the one that better suits your business needs. So for example, if your business need is, if the driver of your data governance is that regulatory compliance, then again, you want to make sure you're going to have that structure in place, policies, the stewardship, but you also want to make sure you have the information security and you have that classification. So if everything scores at, let's say, level 3, but your classification and metadata scores at level 2, then you know you should start dedicating some resources and effort on that classification piece in order to advance. Now, another thing to mention is that level 2, it's usually where most organizations are when they start a data governance program. And very few actually achieve the 4th and especially the 5th level at the enterprise level. And it's more common for specific data domains rather than all data domains to be categorized into the last 2 levels there. Okay. Kalido's data governance maturity model is interesting as well. It does have 4 levels, not 5, not 6, 4 levels. And I think it's one that I think it differs the most from the CMM, especially how they describe their levels. So for example, that level 2, the enterprise repository, they're stating that in here, data governance is typically siloed around individual enterprise repositories, such as a data warehouse or an enterprise resource planning system, or ERP. And data governance tends to be informal. So what they're saying is, you know, if your ERP is really driving that focus of your data governance program, then you must be a level 2. There's no other way around it. So it's interesting, it does differ from the other CMM-based ones where they're kind of scoring everything per domain and then seeing, you know, what the average is and where you fall. Here it's a bit even more descriptive and it's telling you, well, if that's kind of the situation, this is where you're at. There's no other way around it. And they are tracking this. Their 3 domains are organization, process, and technology. And that comes with that main takeaway too, because they're saying that these 3 need to advance in lockstep in order for data governance to be successful. So they're not recommending for you to advance with one of them alone and then catch up with the other 2, for example. So just make sure you're investing in all 3 at the same time, which is interesting, definitely at least in theory. I'm not sure how practical it is. I know definitely when you're tracking all these domains and you're trying to score them, the reality is a little bit different, meaning that you are probably at different levels with each one of them. Okay, the Stamford one. The Stamford one was developed in 2011, and it is really modeled based on a few other ones, such as IBM's and CMM. So we can see some similarities here. Now, it is based on the structure of their own data governance program, with a focus on both foundational and project aspects of data governance. And those are those 2 main domains, foundational and projects. The foundational aspects are really just focusing on measuring core data governance competencies, such as awareness, formalization, and metadata. And the project, so in dark gray there at the bottom, that grouping, is really measuring how effectively data governance concepts are applied in the course of funded projects, such as stewardship and data quality and master data. Next, they're further subdividing each one of them by people, policies, and capabilities. And of course, they do have a couple of measuring types, one quantitative, one qualitative as well. What I do like about this and why I do usually present on it is that even though it was designed with their institutional goals and priorities and competencies in mind, because they offer all this information for free on their website, it's a really good inspiration, let's say, that you can take advantage of just in case you wanted to kind of create your own, or even just start doing your own assessment, because they do provide all those assessment questions and all the descriptors for each one of these levels and domains and subdomains. It's quite comprehensive. All right, so what if now we want to actually start using a model? What do we do? Oh, and by the way, there are a few others ones, and I think on LightsOnData I do cover probably 7 or 8 out of the 9 in greater detail, so feel free to check that out. Okay. So as I mentioned, first we do want to select one of them. And if we can't really compare all of them, how do we select it? Well, you definitely need to account for those business drivers, and I'll give you a couple of examples when I go into the benefits of why we should use maturity models, data governance maturity models. I'll give you a couple of examples of what those business drivers could be. It definitely needs to be based on your data governance framework. That's, I think, a really key takeaway there. And don't forget that whatever you're choosing, you can modify to your needs. Though once you modify it, you might not be able to compare to your peers if they're using the same model. Especially, or you can't really compare one-to-one at least. Now when you're running the assessment, or before you're running that assessment, you're going through those questions that they're asking you to answer. You want to first gather a bunch of information. So first you want to just put together a list of stakeholders that you want to engage in this exercise. You might want to use focus groups and surveys and interviews, and definitely scour all the existing documentation on procedures and standards and policies. You really want to make sure you're aware of whatever it's available out there in the organization in terms of data governance and even other data management areas that are impacted by data governance or a lack of data governance. And then it's really time to just perform that assessment, which again consists of a number of questions. Usually they're kind of multiple choice in terms of answers, even binary, yes, no, or you have different ratings, 0 to 5, 1 to 10, or yes, I'm partially doing it, or no, not at all, or completely, things like that, right? And the question kind of comes, well, is this subjective? And yes, I think there will be some subjective elements and room for interpretation. For example, in the Stanford view here, they're saying a significant portion of targeted audience, blah, blah, blah. I mean, what does a significant portion of target audience mean? Is that 60% of the audience? And what is targeted audience? Is that 95%? It all kind of differs. And I think that's why it's really good to achieve consensus and to be consistent and consult a large enough group of people. So you want to engage with executives and senior managers, line workers, etc., so that the results are representative. I mean, you don't just want to simply survey the CEO, CIO, what have you, and keep that as gospel. So make sure you achieve consensus. And however you choose to answer this question or interpret this question, make sure you document that interpretation, because you will come back to it. Finally, after you have completed that assessment, you'll be giving a score, and it usually comes with a visualization that's either part of the package, or you kind of just putting it together yourself. And these are 3 examples of different visualizations that we can get. And it's very common to see the where we are, the baseline, and what the goal might be. Where do we want to achieve? And as you're looking at this, you might ask yourself, well, why isn't the goal always a level 5 or the maximum level? And I'll give you a reason why towards the end. Now, the bottom visualization, that spider chart, it's something that's very popular with the data governance or data people, but not as popular with the business in some cases, so just something to keep in mind. Okay, so you have your assessment. It's time to really analyze those results. But first, make sure we're going to record that baseline. I think us, especially in data governance field, we love to improve things, right? And we're eager to do so. And we tend to forget where we started from. So definitely record a baseline so you can use that to your advantage in communication. Then you want to validate those findings. As I mentioned, each one of these levels, they come with their own descriptor. So read that description of the level. What does the level tell you that your data governance program looks like, and see if that rings true. And if not, go back to that assessment phase. And then again, you want to start analyzing those findings. A lot of it comes from the description. Some of the models do provide you with a list of the risks and benefits and action steps, but in most cases you will just derive this from the descriptor. So you'll start deriving the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats out of it. You also get a sense of the resources capabilities that you have right now or that you might need. You can see by looking at the step or the level that you want to get to, and determine if you're missing any roles and responsibilities, any skills, any tools that you might need to be able to advance. And of course, you'll also be able to benchmark all this stuff, especially if you're using a model that somebody else has used it, and this tends to come with consulting services, but they will tell you that, well, you as Apple are a level 2, but Microsoft is a level 3. Which is, I think this is good. This is good information. It can give you that business case to go back to your sponsor, the leadership, and maybe even just ask for more resources. Okay, so once you carried out that analysis and assessment in the previous steps, you want to act on it and see how you can increase the level. It's really founded on the notion that if you are at, let's say, level 2, then it's much more important to target the capabilities at level 3 than those at level 4. The model thus acts as a guide to what to tackle, putting some structure on what otherwise would be a more complex process. The vital point here, I think, is that the true outcome of a maturity model assessment isn't what level you are, but really the list of things you need to work on in order to improve. So based on all these information, you'll be able to derive the roadmap and put together your own plan and action items. And in some cases, as I mentioned, further secure buy-in, because you can go back to the leadership and tell them, well, if we want to benefit from whatever level 4 is giving us, then we need to invest in these skills and tools and resources. After you've improved it, you want to just reassess it, right? You want to go back to that assessment, redo it again, see if any changes have been done. And this is usually done every couple of years, every maybe 3 years. It kind of depends on your velocity. Now, definitely make sure you're going to use the same model. I know this is obvious, but a lot of people tend to modify it, and then it's not really a fair comparison. And also make sure you're going to compare against that baseline that you've captured before. And then you'll just repeat that previous cycle. You're going to analyze it and improve it again and keep on going. Now, one last, let's say, hidden step is that communication, right? Don't forget to communicate at each one of these steps. Communication is really key, but an often forgotten aspect of data governance. And really, any chance I get, I try to emphasize its importance. So don't forget to communicate what you're planning to do, what has been done, what are the findings, and what you will do next. And of course, all of these should be tied back to the business goals and the business needs. So let's understand what are those benefits and, let's say, disadvantages. Now, the benefits really come hand in hand with the reasons of why you would ever want to use a data governance maturity model. And that first one is the business driver that I alluded at during the assessment phase, selection phase. So sometimes there might be some regulation in play, right? So there will be a regulatory oversight that requires a minimum level of maturity in data governance. And you would first want to assess it and then prove to the regulator that you are at this level based on this model. There might be some organizational change, such as a merger that presents data governance and management challenges, right? So you're going to acquire or merge with another company. You want to see what level they are at in comparison to yours. Maybe there's something that you can improve and learn from them, or the other way around, and you want to definitely align them and also track those challenges and risks that you might run into once you start combining that data. Obviously, there's a lot of trickiness to it and a lot of challenges that we'll need to overcome in doing so. There's definitely a reason that you want to benchmark overall, right? You want to maybe just benchmark parts of the data governance program against different units and locations. So especially for multinationals, if they have right headquarters in different countries, or really just different units within the same country even, but they would have a different data governance program, maybe because of the team, the organizational structure, the regulatory bodies, what have you, but they would have different data governance programs in each one of these locations. You would want to benchmark all of them against each other and see which ones are leading or lagging data governance practices, and just adapt from each one of them. Or even again, just within one organization, one mid-tier organization, if you're running a decentralized operating model, for example, you can have different data governance program pieces throughout, and you want to use this to benchmark against each other, as well as benchmarking capabilities against peer organization. This again may allow you further rationalization of getting more tools and skills and roles into it, so it helps you with that business case. Now, the maturity model doesn't really provide you with a plan per se, but it does provide you with those insights to build an actionable strategic plan that is grounded in understanding those strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. It also helps prioritize the data governance elements that should be tackled first. So I think it's a really good tool for that. And it's a really good tool not just to track progress, but also communicating it. It can really generate a view of historical progress in a way to showcase to you those achievements and progression. So these are, I think, the reasons and main benefits of leveraging a data governance maturity model in general. But of course, there's the other side of the coin as well that I think we do need to be aware of. First of all, as we touched upon earlier, it can be subjective. The model itself, right, the description, but also the assessment, they can definitely be subjective in their interpretation. I think it's also important to understand that most of these models are really typically constructs of experience, opinion, but also sometimes imagination, and not the results are not or the models themselves are not really the results of applied scientific methods. I think it's also very good for us to be aware that we as humans tend to suffer from what it's called a filter bubble phenomenon, right? So people surround themselves with information that already reflects and therefore already validates their existing opinions. It's really a natural behavior, but we need to make sure that these models are not used to validate our opinions, but they're really validating the reality of the situation. And that's why, again, it's good to consult with multiple people, stakeholders, and not just have the one person fill out that assessment. It definitely requires quite a bit of time and resources to be invested into the assessment itself and the analysis of those results. So definitely be prepared for that. A lot of the organizations would have a slow progression. So make sure it's not the only tool to measure progression and success. So a data governance scorecard could be an alternative as well. And what do I mean by slow? Sometimes to move from one level to another, it can actually take 3, 4, 5 years to be from a reactive to a proactive stage or level. It can definitely take a long time. And because it takes so long in general, we need to be aware that what is mature today might not be mature tomorrow, right? Today's mature practices can easily become tomorrow's obsolete ones. Just something to be aware of. Now, these models are also descriptive rather than prescriptive, meaning that they describe what must be done rather than how it must be done. So you will still need to figure out how to best do something, and doing it doesn't mean that it is done right. Because of this, I think it's sometimes hard to compare even amongst those that use the same model. For example, two organizations might have a business glossary, but one of them might have a crappy one, and the model will still put both at the same level. And I've seen this a couple of times where I was chatting with some other organizations, and they did have that business glossary, and when I was taking a look at it, well, in one instance it was really just a Word document with a couple of pages. Okay, it's a good start, but definitely they were not at the same level that we were at the time. And the other one, even though they had implemented a tool and they had hundreds of business glossary terms entered in there, after 5 minutes by just browsing through it, you could see there were a lot of duplicates. There were a lot of there was really a lack of standards in terms of the naming convention and even the definition. There were a lot of attributes really missing from there. So they had that checkbox that yes, we do have a business glossary, but it wasn't necessarily done by using best practices. So something to keep in mind that the maturity model doesn't really indicate that. All right, so some of the lessons learned. Again, I think it's a good comparison tool, mainly against yourself to see where you were yesterday. Definitely make sure it is based on your data governance framework, whatever you're adopting. For example, if you're using the data management framework with the data governance component as well, then maybe you want to use a mix between the CMM and the DAMA knowledge areas as an example. Now, none of our organizations are really truly unique, but I think we are all special. So it's highly likely that the data governance model you will adopt, you will end up adapting. And I think that's true. And it's okay. The true outcome of a maturity model assessment isn't what level you are at, but that list of things you need to work on to improve. So again, use that to your advantage to build your strategy, gain more adoption and resources. But again, that level 5 or the highest level should not always be attained. And why is that? Well, it might be cost prohibitive in most cases, right? We all want, for example, if we're to talk about data quality, we would all love perfect data. But what is the cost of achieving that 100% accuracy on some of these data elements, right? And what's that return of investment? Is it really always worth investing into it to get to 100% and not 90? So it might be cost prohibitive. And also I think the level to achieve should not be a goal in the first place. I think the goal should be based on your business needs and not what the model is telling you. Now, to reiterate, most models are descriptive rather than prescriptive, so don't forget about using those best practices. It's not just about ticking things off the list. It can be a good tool for your data governance program to see where you are in your program's progression, and it's a good informant to your data governance strategy and can help address some business needs. I think it's okay to be skeptical. As I mentioned before, a lot of these models are not scientifically proven, right? So the order in which you should tackle something in your organization might not be the same as what the model is telling you. And lastly, again, don't forget to communicate at every step. Very, very important. All right, don't forget to get in touch with me and connect with me on LinkedIn, subscribe to a YouTube channel. I always enjoy meeting new people in person or online and listening to your feedback and sharing ideas and information. So please get in touch with me. I love to hear from you.